Welcome back to another episode of Gatehouse Insights. In this episode, we are diving deeper into the topic of flexible working arrangements, including the benefits and challenges of flexible work, plus the strategies companies can implement to support employees who are wanting this arrangement in their careers. I'm joined by Elisé, who has been working flexibly for the last 20 years. Make sure you subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel to catch it all. So you've been working flexibly for the last 20 years.
Yes.
Can you share your story on what got you onto that journey of flexible work?
Well, it was interesting. When I was thinking back, my immediate thought was that I first started when I had children, but in fact it wasn't. And casting my mind back, it was actually when I met my now husband. We had met just as he'd signed a contract to be an expat living in Singapore. But that role was not to have, his base was in Singapore, but he was actually responsible for global implementations around the world. Therefore he wasn't actually going to be based in Singapore for any period of time. So we actually embarked on a long distance commuting romance and got engaged very quickly, and also we're getting married but still living in different countries, which you might wonder why. And I applied for leave without pay from my job, and also the context is that our careers were just starting off. So I'd not long been qualified as a lawyer, and his career was obviously just starting to make some strides after qualifying also at uni. And my boss approached his boss, and she, with vision, beautifully came back and said, but hasn't she just got married and doesn't she need some money, and we've got this amazing project and wouldn't she want to do that? And part-time, she can do it from anywhere, she can do it from a hotel room, and that's what started the journey. So I was originally applying for leave without pay. She came back and actually between them came up with a project. It was the start of from memory enterprise bargaining. And I was working from a hotel room 3 days a week. I was doing the old dial-up. It was pre-internet days. And so anyone who remembers that wonderful sound, and if you don't remember it, Google the old dial-up, because it's for a bit of fun. And I had to dial up, and the lines would sometimes fall out. But it was about, they set clear expectations. There was trust involved. But I was it was fabulous. It was that's what started the journey, and it continued from there when we did eventually come back, land in the same country. Yeah. We went to Sydney. Then we had our children, and flexibility has been a part of our life for both of us in some form or another. Flexibility was also for my husband. They arranged a project that was needed for his skill set in New Zealand because they thought that was a closer commute from Singapore to Sydney. Yeah. So we've had accommodating, wonderful leaders in our lives as well along the journey.
It's incredible that your then boss 20 years ago was so open to flexible working arrangements, where now some people are like, no, it will never work. But 20 years ago, with no amount of technology we have today, was so open to it. That's just incredible.
And I'm happy to give her a call out. She's still around, Rilla Moore, and I'm forever grateful to her for that, for having the insight to offer that to me at that time, to my husband and I. We were very grateful to her.
It's awesome. So working flexibly for so long, what has the benefits been for you and your family?
Endless, I think. It's kept me on my career trajectory. And the trajectory, as we say, there's a lattice. Some people look at it as purely the ladder. I've looked at it as, really growing your skills out in many ways. So it's not necessarily always that it's just the next step up the ladder. It might be that I've wanted to just expand my skills in a particular area. I haven't always wanted to, you know, pursue partnership in a law firm, or I've taken sometimes career moves that people might have gone, why has she gone down that path? And it might have been because the person that I've wanted to work with is in that organisation, or, you know, there'll be a reason why I've gone down that path, and you only need to ask me and I'm happy to share. But the value to me has often been about, I've been able to, the balance for life, for family and for work has been more rounded because of flexibility. Without it, you know, I wouldn't have stayed in some of those roles.
Yeah. I wanted to discuss, I suppose there's lots of benefits. What have been some of the challenges with flexible work from both, I suppose from both your side and even the employer side that you've found?
I think flexibility, there needs to be clear communication from the outset. I think both parties need to understand, you know, how it's best going to work, and not leave anything unsaid, because if you go into it with just assumptions or preconceived ideas, then it can sometimes set it up on the wrong footing. So I think that the most important thing is to have boundaries around it. You know, I've seen people, and I think, you know, I've been guilty of it myself, working part-time, but being so hell-bent on proving to everyone that, you know, I'm not slouching, I'm not slacking off at all, and so therefore I've got to, you know, be online. You know, as soon as I put the kids to bed, I'm still on emails really late at night. I'm not alone there, I know that. But there's a point where you've got to say, well, actually, I'm actually being paid for part-time. My benefits are accruing at a part-time basis. You've got to be disciplined yourself, and you've got to put some boundaries around it. But having said that, there's got to be, I think, some give and take on both sides to this for it to work effectively. You know, sometimes there is that call you've just got to make. You know, it doesn't neatly fit into the maybe a box, and I think the give and take is important. I think you've just got to know when it's there's a level of discomfort about when the boundaries are blurring. So I think as long as you know, I hate to use the word trust without there being, because that can sometimes feel a bit nebulous, but I think you've got, as long as, you know, there's outcomes that you're delivering to, there's the discussion, people aren't assuming. For example, I've seen offices closed down and assumptions made about where people can work, and do they have the facilities to work from certain places. You know, do they have the facilities to work in a particular place? Do they have the laptop? Do they have the chair? All of those things you might take for granted. Even I've seen it globally, offshore. You know, so certain countries don't have the same space that maybe we might have here, but even here, some people are renting, some people don't have the same place, you know, that others who might have their own home do. And, you know, I think don't make judgments, don't assume, have the conversation. And the other important thing about flexibility is don't presume that someone's reason is more valid than someone else's. And don't presume that flexibility is only the domain for working families or parents. There can be people with caring responsibilities that are at the other end. There may be valid reasons why someone needs to travel overseas to look after or to attend a wedding that's important to them. Or, you know, I knew somebody who was competing or had aspirations to compete in the Olympic Games and had a rigorous training schedule, and they worked their hours around it. There's all vast reasons for people. I've got friends who don't have children that have, you know, a sick dog, and that dog was having cancer treatment. You know, our families come in all shapes and sizes these days, and I think we need to be really alive to that and just keep an open mind about and listen to why and what flexibility means to someone. It's the most desired. There are a lot of studies. Gallup's recent studies. It's the most desired perk, if you want to still call it a perk for people.
So you're an expert in employment law, and you've also held senior HR roles within ASX-listed companies. Can you share some of the do's and don'ts from an employer point of view, and then can you share the do's and don'ts from an employee point of view?
Okay. This might sound terribly obvious, but I think from an employer point of view, too often I see that employers don't know the law around flexibility. So my starting proposition would be know the law. There are actually legal requirements around flexibility that cover flexible work arrangements. There are things enshrined in modern awards, in the National Employment Standards as a starting point. So whilst we often talk about flexibility as a nice to have and something nice to do for people, there are actually legal requirements and considerations that accompany flexibility. So it goes beyond just being a nice to have in 2019. So my number one thing would be know the law. And the next point I'd make is, and don't, when somebody comes to you with a request for flexibility, what unfortunately can sometimes happen is that people just associate flexibility with too hard, and they immediately think or actually express a groan of, like, this is just another thing to add to my already busy day, and they don't see it in terms of a win-win or something that might actually help them retain a member of their team that can be something really good for the workplace and for them, and productivity, all the rest of it. They see it in terms of a negative. And another thing I'd suggest is actually understanding what flexibility can entail and the various options that are available. I think sometimes flexibility is a term that's kind of widely bandied about, but people don't really understand necessarily the range of things that can fall under flexibility. So flexibility can be a formal arrangement where it's permanent, or an informal arrangement where someone may choose to come in early a couple of days a week, or on an ad hoc basis, or one day a month they alter their day slightly. They're all different ways of looking at it. So I think sometimes people just have this term, but they don't really understand what it encompasses. And different organisations do it differently and offer different things. So in my own working life, I've availed myself of different, and been fortunate enough, I acknowledge as well, to avail myself of different things. So I've purchased additional leave. I've worked part-time for different periods, and that can be limited part-time, so maybe just 4.5 days a week, so that I could pick up the children earlier on a Friday. And that meant a great deal to me. So I might have finished Friday lunchtime, and, that was special. There might have been a different time when I worked 4 days a week or 3 days a week. Then there have been, taking 5 weeks annual leave instead of 4 weeks annual leave. So, there are just a range of things that people can do. And I think knowing what some of those options are and really discussing them with people to understand what might work for them. I worked with someone one time who was, on the employee flip side of things, who was just really, it was a restructure. They were too really scared to speak up because they had personal circumstances where they needed to get their children to a special school very early in the morning, and the change of location for them meant that it was going to be very difficult to do so. With their permission, I was able to negotiate a different start time. Now, they thought they were just going to lose their job. So it's that creating a place where people can genuinely speak up and ask for what they need that can accommodate their circumstances, I think is important too. So having that environment that enables people to speak up is really important. So, as a leader, as a manager, that's important. Do you actually role model flexibility? Does someone feel that they could even bring that up? It's all very well to have flexibility espoused on paper, in policies, in manuals, etc., online, but does the organisation actually and the people within it role model it?
Yeah.
I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah. What about from the employee's point of view? Do's and don'ts there from their end?
I think from an employee's point of view, I think it's, one of the things I just mentioned, I think speaking up and being able to ask for what you want is not always an easy thing to do. I mean, we still are a society really where it's a hierarchical work structure, whether we like to admit it or not. And so there is a power thing of, there's a boss and you're an employee. So there is still some places do it better than others, but essentially that is what we have. So with that in mind, it's still quite hard, I think, for many people to ask for what they want and what's going to work for them. So making that easier for people is great from an organisational perspective, but having the courage for people to speak up. If you don't ask, you don't get. And I'd encourage people, what have you got to lose? If you don't want to die wondering, and if it's going to make the difference for you and reduce stress, there's a lot of talk about mental health, and stress is a component of that. And I think anxiety, all of those things, if anything that's going to make your life easier to manage, and if work and how you work and commutes all play into that, then have that discussion earlier rather than later. But sit down and map it out. Work out what is it that you actually want. Have a plan A, have a plan B, and really, if you need to, road test it with a trusted friend, partner, or whoever, and anticipate, the naysayer, the negatives that might come up, so that you can address them. If they say, "Oh no, that'll never work because, our hours are this," well, yes, I can work that out because of. Really think it through and address those issues up front before you put the request in, or before, and perhaps in the first place have that discussion informally, and then do it formally. That might be a suggested way forward, but I would, depending on if it's a one-off, you just want to, start work tomorrow at 9:30 instead of 9. That shouldn't require that level of detail, hopefully. But if it's a more formal arrangement moving forward, then I would, and depending on the workplace and depending on your manager/leader, you might need to road test it first with a friend or someone you trust, and anticipate what roadblocks might come up so that you can address them first. That would be my kind of number one tip. Yeah.
How do organisations create like a safe environment or a culture of people asking for what they want in terms of flexibility? How do HR managers, who's responsible for that? How do they go about implementing that type of thing into the workforce?
That's a terrific question. I'm trying to think, where have I seen it done really well? Look, I've seen it done in pockets. I'd love to say I've seen it done really well everywhere. I really haven't. I haven't. I still think largely, it's being enshrined in, legislation really that's starting to make it more acceptable, which shouldn't be the case, but that's probably where you're getting a little more of making it more mainstream. But still there's still discretion attached to any request for flexibility. And as we know, people join an organisation, but people invariably leave a manager. And that still is true today, I'd suggest. And we still have a long way to go, and there is still too much reliance on the discretion of an individual manager, I think. Organisations have to get behind this. A recent Swinburne study, indicated how many people want to have the concept of anywhere work. They don't want to be commuting. There are many people who, especially in office work, believe that their jobs can be done, a large degree of it can be done from their home environment. Vic Road's study said, by 2030 we're going to sort of have, double the cars or whatever, or our commute time will be doubled, notwithstanding the concept of electric cars, etc. So we've got a lot more work to do in this space, and I think companies that lead the way on this will really attract talent and retain people, so I think having genuine conversations about this, you can do so much in this space. It's not that hard. It really isn't. I don't know why there's still a reluctance to do something holistically about it, and to do it through all the levels of an organisation. I accept that there will be air traffic controllers that can't necessarily do their job from home. I accept there are certain roles that cannot be performed flexibly, all the time in all the ways we would like. And the courts have, there have been some cases on this, but that does not say that we cannot look at each job and each case on its merits and determine a request genuinely and look at it and say, but can this, without making a foregone conclusion that it's just all too hard. And I think sometimes we're a bit too quick to say, it's just not how we do things around here. I think we've got to get better at this is how we can do things around here, and just get better at implementing and saying yes.
Yeah, it's true. How has having both the employment law and senior exec HR experience helped you in your career?
I think it's been fantastic. I remember, when I first qualified as a lawyer, I worked in-house. I worked in a law firm, but then I was approached and worked in-house in a organisation, and many of my clients were HR professionals. And I thought I knew HR because I was advising HR professionals. Some years later, I was approached to do an HR role, and it's so funny how you think you know something, and until you do it, you have no idea. It was the best experience. I did that for many years. I was in the coalface. I was a line HR role. I was became the advisor to one who is now CEO of a leading bank and the other one who's the deputy CEO in waiting of another large organisation. So advising both of those people who were very demanding, wonderful people was terrific experience. And I would say every single day I use my legal expertise to inform my decision making about HR, because without the knowledge of the law, for me, I just think it brought a more holistic view of where the decisions, the practical implications of anything we rolled out, particularly when we were looking at large-scale transformations. I've always been very empathetic when it comes to people and the impact on people with those sort of decisions, and also being very mindful of the law and what you needed to do. Meant that when somebody would say, "Oh, you just do this," it was like, hang on a second, I think we need to factor in several other steps, which is not HR just putting a roadblock, but it's about actually doing this, properly with real rigour and with all of the appropriate checks and balances in place, and it'll only add probably a couple of days to something that's really important. So I think for me it's been a great combination skill set. It stood me in good stead, and I'm really very grateful to have acquired that skill set. And I actually look back and go, flexibility has been key to the journey of some of the roles and how I've come to be where I am now.
It's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing today.
Thank you. Thanks, Louise.
No worries. And that's it. Another episode of Gatehouse Insights draws to an end. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing this video with your friends. If you haven't already done so, please make sure you subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel to catch it all.